Welcome back. My name is Aaron and this is A Course in Miracles, Episode 6. In our last episode, we talked about the concept of innocence as taught in the Course. And in today's video, I want to look at another primary spiritual truth that is the key component to attaining the peace of God that the Course talks about. Stillness is a central teaching in all spiritual traditions, and the Course is certainly no exception. When we talk about what spiritual liberation is, we're simply talking about the realization of presence. And the primary focus of the Course material is helping us distinguish the difference between truth and illusion. And at some point in our spiritual journey, we come to recognize that all truth is found only in this moment. And the ego seeks to constantly distract us from this moment with illusions, regrets of the past, or fears of the future. And so this is why the Course stresses the importance of silence again and again throughout the material, with phrases like, "Let us be still an instant," and "The Christ in you is very still." So understanding what it means to be still is paramount to our attainment of inner peace. So let's take a closer look at what the Course has to say about it. When we begin our journey into spiritual awakening, it is inevitable to believe that it is a process of acquiring knowledge, and this is the biggest mistake the spiritual seeker can make. We read more books, listen to more lectures, and attend more seminars in the belief that we can learn our way into enlightenment. The paradox in this is the fact that enlightenment is not conceptual. It cannot be learned. In fact, enlightenment is a process of unlearning all of our previous conditioning and ways in which we perceive reality. The Course says, salvation can be seen as nothing more than the escape from concepts. So as the spiritual seeker continues to collect knowledge, what naturally occurs is that the ego begins using that knowledge against the seeker to further torment them and distort their perception. Sigmund Freud once said, "Knowledge will be used to feed the neurosis." This is not to say that there's no value in acquiring spiritual knowledge, but only to say that in and of itself, it cannot bring freedom. Knowledge serves only to point away from itself towards the truth of this present moment. The ego wants us to be lost in stories of the past and future, to distract us from the liberation and peace of the now moment. In chapter 24 of the Teacher's Manual, the Course states, "The emphasis of this Course always remains the same. It is at this moment that complete salvation is offered to you, and it is at this moment that you can accept it. Atonement might be equated with total escape from the past and total lack of interest in the future. Heaven is here. There is nowhere else. Heaven is now. There is no other time." So if spiritual liberation is an escape from the past and total lack of interest in the future, then again we can see the paramount importance of stillness for the spiritual seeker. To be present is to be still. The two are synonymous. Stillness refers to the internal, not the external. Stillness is an acceptance of the now moment. It is a state of consciousness in which nothing is resisted. When we resist what is happening in this moment, whether it's the way we feel or an unpleasant circumstance that's happening, we create the ego illusion. There is a separate self apart from life who is now telling life that it is making a mistake, that it shouldn't be the way it is. And this separate self is nothing but a projection from the mind. All of creation is unified, and the flow of life is unfolding exactly as it should. And when we recognize this, we stop creating our own suffering by resisting life and instead begin to flow with it. This is the realization of presence. There is nothing to do but be here and now. Nothing needs to be done but to be still and quiet and let the moment present itself to you. This is where the peace of God is always found. In one passage, the Course states, "When peace comes at last to those who wrestle with temptation and fight against the giving in to sin, when the light comes at last into the mind given to contemplation, or when the goal is finally achieved by anyone, it always comes with just one happy realization. I need do nothing." I need do nothing is a statement of allegiance, a truly undivided loyalty. Believe it for just one instant, and you will accomplish more than is given to a century of contemplation. So the question you may be thinking is, but Aaron, you don't understand. My mind is so noisy. I can never be still because my mind is always going berserk with thoughts. Even when I try to meditate, I just give up in frustration because I'm never able to quiet my mind. And the truth is that this is not unique to you. All of our minds are like this at the beginning. And before we awaken to the knowledge that I am not my mind, the ego has full reign over it. So this is nothing to be concerned about. Until we create more space inside of us, we don't have the option whether or not to have a quiet mind. Because again, we are not the thinker of thoughts. Thoughts are thinking themselves, and the ego is simply tricking you into taking credit for them. So if you imagine the thoughts that ego thinks as rocket ships, and the atmosphere in which they are launched is your awareness, all the rocket ship has to do is make it out of the atmosphere to get your attention. So we can't stop the ego from launching its thought rockets, but we can begin to increase the atmosphere in which they are launched. So by expanding our awareness, we begin to increase the presence and stillness within us. And slowly, these thought rocket ships have farther and farther distance to travel before making it out of the atmosphere. And it's also important to understand that these rockets do not have an unlimited supply of fuel, because the fuel that they run off of is the attention that you've given to them. So as we continue to increase our awareness, eventually these rocket ships run out of fuel and come crashing back down to the surface. And it's at this point that we finally begin to experience a still and quiet mind. And in this stillness, the distinction between truth and illusion becomes increasingly obvious, and we're slowly able to detach from old beliefs and stories and patterns. And this is the only way that spiritual liberation is ever achieved. Now here's the major point I want to make for this video. There's only one way to truly find inner stillness, and it's not by force, by striving, by acquiring knowledge, or any other means. It is only by falling in love with it. What you need to see is that the reason your mind is so noisy is because you are in love with thinking. You believe that there's more value to be gained from thoughts than from silence. And as long as you believe that, you will continue to empower the mind. Of course, thoughts are useful for practical matters and certainly have their place. But what you need to see is that thoughts are completely and utterly useless when it comes to spiritual liberation. You cannot think your way into enlightenment, because enlightenment is the escape from thinking. Silence is where the answer to freedom is found. And A Course in Miracles says, "Learn to be quiet, for his voice is heard in stillness." When I was going through this phase of my spiritual journey, I was so determined to quiet my mind that I used to sit out on the balcony of my apartment in the Bay Area and just watch the cars driving over the bridge in the distance. And I would practice observing the cars at the exclusion of everything else. And whenever my mind would drag me away with a thought, I would just bring myself back to observing the cars again as soon as I recognized it. And I would do this for about 30 to 60 minutes a night. And after some time of doing this, I started to enter these states of really deep stillness. There was just no commentary on what I was seeing anymore. And the mind seemed to become sort of like a sleeping animal. It was still there, but with no activity. And so as I tasted these brief glimpses of silence more frequently, I slowly began to fall in love with them. And as I fell in love with silence, it began to appear more frequently and more easily. And whenever my mind would be very noisy, it would just cause me to crave that silence again, sort of like a long-lost lover. And eventually, I began to enter this state seemingly at random, just while being in the shower, or waiting in line at the grocery store, or sitting in traffic, or even working with a client. And I would sort of slip into this state the way that you slip into a warm bubble bath with a glass of red wine. The present moment for me became sweet and delicious like pink lemonade. And as corny as that might sound, that's the way that silence tasted to me. And when somebody's truly in love, nobody has to remind them to think about their lover. And when you fall in love with stillness, nobody has to remind you to be still. And through experiencing these states, I began to see that every moment is perfect, exactly the way it should be. But it's only through silence that we can recognize it. In stillness, we remember that this moment is all we ever want. And everything the mind tries to convince us would be better is just a mirage in the desert. Once you know that it's just an illusion, then you stop chasing it and become still. It is the love of silence that brings spiritual liberation, not the accumulation of knowledge. If you were trapped on a small desert island with no internet, no books, and no resources to learn from, you would likely achieve liberation even sooner. Without much to think about, you would be forced to be still and present with the moment. And this opportunity is always offered to us if we desire it. The mind pretends to be the ultimate reality and demands all of our attention. The more interest and significance we give to the mind, the more suffering it brings us. We build mental structures to avoid feeling pain, and yet they are the very thing that causes it. Our identities become our abusers, our defenses become our demons, and our need for escape becomes our tormentor. Who can save themselves from a hell of their own making? And so the ego dies when you fall out of love with it. But you can only fall out of love with the ego by falling in love with something more beautiful. Here is the only escape from pain and misery, and the only means by which inner freedom is attained. It comes only when that quiet place within is found, in which all peace and serenity abides. Silence. It makes no sound, yet is more lovely than music. It has no form, yet is more beautiful than a sunrise. It speaks no words, yet provides all answers. And in its all-consuming magnificence, the past simply vanishes. Your memories are still there, but seen now through heaven's eyes. You just fall in love with it, and being no longer wanted, the ego slips away. Now there is a still and quiet space where fear once was. Silence has come to bless everything with peace. So spend a few moments each day in stillness, and begin to enjoy and savor the sweetness of it. Even a few seconds of peace is a victory, because the more time you spend enjoying the richness of silence, the more it will begin to appear on its own. Eventually, you will crave it with all of your heart, and when the desire for silence outweighs the desire for thinking, you are free. And nowhere is this truth explained better than by the Course itself. God's peace is recognized at first by just one thing. In every way, it is totally unlike all previous experiences. It calls to mind nothing that went before. It brings with it no past associations. It is a new thing entirely. There is a contrast, yes, between this thing and all the past. But strangely, it is not a contrast of true differences. The past just slips away, and in its place is everlasting quiet. Only that. The contrast first perceived has merely gone. Quiet has reached to cover everything.